What is an RPG? Honestly, this question's been floating around gaming circles for years now, and if you ask any purists, none of them can really agree, and somehow everyone's still arguing about it. If you literally ask 10 different gamers what an RPG is, you're gonna get 10 different answers, and none of them are gonna be technically wrong. They're just answering from completely different eras, from completely different perspectives. Some people grew up on old school stat heavy, like slow burn RPGs like I did. Others grew up on modern games where everything has XP bars and skill trees and dialogue wheels put on top of it. And that's kind of the problem, because RPG used to actually mean something. Now it's a label we throw on anything with the numbers going up, and when we don't agree what the word means, we end up comparing games that were never designed to be compared in the first place, and that's where it becomes a problem. So before we argue about what an RPG is now, we need to basically back up and ask a much simpler question. What was an RPG originally supposed to be? To understand why this argument even exists, you have to go back to where the term RPG actually came from. Originally, RPG literally meant role-playing game. Not numbers go up game, not battle with turn-based game, not skill-based turn trees, min-maxing game, role-playing. The idea didn't come from video games at all. It came from tabletop games and fantasy storytelling. Stuff like Dungeons and Dragons, where the entire point was inhabiting a character inside a world and seeing how the character changed over time. You weren't just controlling an avatar or a character, you were playing a role. Who is this character? What are they good at? What are they bad at? How do they change as the story unfolds? Early RPGs were built around that idea first, and then systems came second. And because of that, story wasn't optional. RPGs had a beginning, a middle, a clear-cut ending. You started out weak normally and inexperienced and usually kind of useless, and by the end, you were someone completely different. That transformation, that was the fantasy. And yeah, most of these games were set in medieval fantasy worlds, swords and magic and dragons and dungeons and all that stuff, but not because fantasy defined RPGs, but because fantasy made role-playing games easy and it was basically a natural fit. Importantly though, story alone didn't make something an RPG. Plenty of games had good stories. Action games, platformers, adventure games, all of them told stories. What made RPGs different was the story and the character were tied together. The character didn't just move through the plot, the character grew because of it. And that was basically the gist. And what that growth meant was not just something emotional or narrative, it was literally mechanical, because as you grow, that's where things like stats and skills and progression came in. Not as like flavor, but as the backbone of the experience, which is why for a long time, RPGs felt very distinct from other genres. They were slower, more deliberate, less about reflexes and more about decisions and strategy. And for people who grew up in that era like myself, that definition didn't feel controversial at all, it just made sense. But once games started changing, once action, speed, new style of gameplay became more important, that clean definition basically started to crack, and that's where the confusion really begins. Once you understand where RPGs came from, the next piece clicks into place pretty fast. Because in a real RPG, role-playing isn't about the dialogue choices or pretending you're someone else, it's about the change. Measurable change. RPGs are built around an idea that your character gets stronger, smarter, more capable over time, and that growth is tracked through systems. Stats, numbers, attributes, things that actually affect how the game plays. Health, strength, intelligence, defense, agility, all those kinds of stats. Wherever they form, they take place. These stats aren't cosmetic. They decide how much damage you deal, how much damage you can take, what actions you're allowed to perform. This isn't just a video game thing. It comes straight from the tabletop RPGs. Dungeons and Dragons, character sheets, dice rolls. Your character is literally defined by numbers on a page. This design philosophy carried straight into early computer and console RPGs. Whether it was PC RPGs, a JRPG, or a pen and paper game, the idea was the same. Your character you are at the start of the game is objectively weaker than your character is at the end of the game, and that difference matters. You're not just better because you got better at the controls. You're not better because the character has changed or because your reflexes got better. You're better because the character actually changed through stats. That the systems literally and the numbers you're looking at say so by going up. That's what separated RPGs from like action adventure games or something like that. Progression wasn't just about skills or reflexes. It was about character growth baked directly into the mechanics. When you seen the numbers going up, you knew your character was getting stronger. If your stats didn't change, if your character didn't meaningfully evolve, then the role playing kind of fell apart, which is why progression wasn't optional in early RPGs. It was the foundation literally everything else sat on. And once you accept that, the next logical question becomes obvious. How does that progression actually happen? That's where leveling, experience points, and skill systems come in. It's not you getting better at your reflexes or you getting good. It's you planning and strategizing and literally getting better through the experience points or XP or whatever existed for a very specific reason, like I said, to explain why your character was improving. In RPGs, progression doesn't just happen because time passed. It happens because your character did things. They fought enemies, they completed quests, they solved problems and puzzles, survived situations they weren't strong enough to handle before. You defeat a monster, you gain experience. You finish a quest, you gain experience. You overcome a challenge that was previously impossible, and the game acknowledges that your character has grown from it by giving you experience. Then once you've earned enough experience, something happens. You level up. Leveling up isn't just a number ticking higher, it's a checkpoint. It's a moment where the game literally says your character is no longer who they were before, stats increase, abilities unlock, new skills become available, sometimes entirely new playstyles open up. And again, it isn't just for flavor. This is like the structure. In traditional RPGs, leveling is what paces the entire experience. Enemies, areas, bosses are designed around the assumption that your character will grow at a certain rate and be a certain level around when you meet them. You don't beat the dragon because you mashed buttons harder or because you learned the attack patterns or because your reflexes got better and you just were able to get good. You beat it because your character reached the point where they were literally capable of doing so. You went back, you grinded, you got XP, you came back and you were able to do it because your numbers were there. Which brings us to my point in the next piece. How that mechanical growth ties directly into the story and the challenges RPGs put in front of you. That's where bosses, narrative progression, and stuff like that comes in. Now stay with me here. You usually start weak, unprepared, the world's bigger than you, and most things that you meet up against are things that you simply can't handle yet. As the story goes forward, your character grows with it. Challenges scales up, stakes rise, and the game constantly checks whether you're ready to continue by gating you with levels with bosses. And that's what they're for. In RPGs, bosses aren't just big enemies that you meet. They're literally progression checks. They exist to answer one question and one question only. Has your character grown strong enough to move on? If you get crushed, the game isn't asking for better reflexes or for you to get good. It's telling you you're underleveled and underprepared or missing key abilities. And when you finally win, it doesn't just feel mechanical. It feels earned. It feels like the strategy you put behind it worked. And most RPGs don't expect you to reach that point alone. Parties and companies in RPGs exist because they're built around cooperation. Different roles, different strengths. Progress is coming from combining them and finding synergies. And that idea, like I said, goes all the way back to tabletop RPGs and classical fantasy storytelling. Growth, story, teamwork within the party, all using the same systems. That is what defined an RPG. For a long time, RPGs were easy to spot. They were slower. They were normally turn-based. They were more deliberate, never about reflexes and normally more about decision-making. And for a lot of people, that got simplified even further. Turn-based combat basically became shorthand for RPG. If a game paused, let you pick commands, and ran on stats, it was an RPG, simple. But even back then, that wasn't actually true. You had real, undeniable RPGs that weren't turn-based at all. Early first-person RPGs opened up a lot of possibilities. They were open-ended systems, games that still revolved around stats and progression and character growth, just without turns or turn-based. So even in a classic era, the definition wasn't as clean as people remember as just, oh, it's turn-based, so it's an RPG. Then things really started to break. Other genres began borrowing mechanics from RPGs and getting bigger because of it. Action games added stats, leveling, and gear. One of the clearest examples I can think of is Castlevania. The moment RPG systems entered the picture in Symphony of the Night, the series transformed and exploded in popularity. And it didn't stop there. Shooters added progression and unlocks. Adventure games added XP and perks and dialogue choices and trees. Multiplayer games started tracking long-term growth. RPG mechanics spread literally everywhere. Even games that nobody would seriously call an RPG. Take something like Call of Duty multiplayer. You literally level up, you unlock abilities, you progress over time. Those are textbook RPG mechanics, but no one in their right mind is calling that an RPG because mechanics alone aren't the identity. At this point, like I said, RPG elements are like seasoning. You can sprinkle them into almost any genre to add depth, retention, or like long-term engagement without changing the game and what it fundamentally is. So this video isn't really arguing about what an RPG is. It's about being able to clearly explain different kinds of games. At this point, RPG is basically an umbrella term. It's no longer a genre. It tells you a game probably has progression, stats, leveling, but it doesn't tell you how the game actually plays. That's where subgenres matter. Action RPG, CRPG, turn-based RPG, SRPG. These are all wildly different experiences. They feel different, they play different, they care about different things, they share systems, and that's basically it. So instead of asking, is this an RPG, which honestly isn't that useful anymore, the better question is, what kind of RPG is this trying to be? It's about action and momentum, it's about systems and choices, it's about stats and levels and getting good. Is it about tactics, planning, or story? It can be any of these things. Once you look at it that way, things get a little bit clearer and games stop being compared to other games that they were never really trying to be. And that's really the point. RPG isn't one thing anymore. It's a category, not a genre, and a shared design that branches in basically different directions. Different systems, different goals, different experiences, and that's not a problem. That's actually a good thing. But where there needs to be clear definitions is because of a reason I'll tell you exactly why quickly. Because when you slap RPG of the year on a ballot, you're pretending all RPGs are aiming for the same experience, and they're not. Take Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 and Expedition 33. Both got labeled as RPGs, which they are, that part's fine, but they're not the same kind of RPG. KCD 2 is a hardcore simulation-heavy RPG. It's about realism and systems, immersion, and living in a world that doesn't like bend to you at all. Progression is slow and punishing and deliberate. And Expedition 33 is almost the opposite. It's focused, it's turn-based, it's narrative-driven RPG. It's about structure and pacing and the presentation and classic RPG mechanics like turn-based combat. And it's done clean and intentionally, and that's a completely different game than KCD 2. They're solving completely different problems and tackling completely different genres. So putting them in the same RPG of the year category isn't really a fair comparison. Not because one isn't better than the other or one is worse, but because they're not even competing on the same lane or in the same genre. And that's the real issue. Not what an RPG is, not who's right or wrong. RPG has become a broad label for systems, while the actual experiences live in the subgenres. All the subgenres I mentioned, once you acknowledge that, everything basically clicks. Awards make more sense, comparisons make more sense, players stop feeling crazy when two games both called RPGs feel nothing alike. So the takeaway isn't that one deserved it more, it's that they never should have been compared side by side in the first place. Different goals, different designs, different experiences, same umbrella. And that's fine as long as the future is a little bit more honest about this, and things like Game Awards can figure out a way to acknowledge that when it comes to labeling things like something for an award. So that's all this really is. It's not a debate, it's not gatekeeping about RPGs, it's just clarity. RPG isn't one thing anymore, and I don't think it should be labeled like that. It's a family of systems spread across a bunch of different genres and experiences. So once you start pretending they're all the same, or stop pretending they're all the same, the conversations literally get better, the comparisons make more sense, and games stop getting judged for things they were never trying to be. So cool, if you like turn-based RPGs, no problem. If you like simulation-heavy RPGs, cool. If you like action RPGs, also cool. Just don't expect them to compete in the same lane, right? Looking at you, Geoff. This whole video was inspired by a conversation I had with a friend where he was telling me E33 isn't really an RPG just because it has turn-based. It doesn't have life sim elements, and that made me realize that people's definition of an RPG, or what an RPG even is anymore, has become largely confused. I just thought it made for an interesting convo and was curious what you guys would all think. What defines an RPG to you? What must it include to for sure be an RPG? Just turn-based combat automatically makes something an RPG. You know what I mean? It's weird. The lines are skewed. So I'm curious to hear all your guys' thoughts. And as always, of course, I appreciate you guys being here. Please show the channel some love and throw the video a like, throw the channel a sub if you haven't already, and then come back and hang out with me next week as usual. I appreciate you guys being here. Thank you so much. I'll see you guys next time.